Stephanie White is obsessed building up Stephanie White. Stephanie White, in case you aren't aware, Steph, there's going to be over 100 free agents this offseason. You got 2 expansion teams coming in. You have a college draft in about a month. You have training camp knocking at your front door. You have decisions to make within your roster. Do you pay Kelsey Mitchell? Do you not pay Kelsey Mitchell? Because you
Obsessed with the process. That's the phrase that separates championship coaches from everyone else. Bill Belichick didn't win 6 Super Bowls by doing ESPN side gigs during the offseason. Phil Jackson didn't build dynasties by calling college basketball games when he should have been scouting talent. And yet here we are, with Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White choosing to spend her March calling NSAT Celebrate tournament games instead of preparing for the most compressed, chaotic offseason in WNBA history.
That would mean so much to me. Stephanie White makes career move before Indiana Fever season. Indiana Fever coach Stephanie White is taking her talents to the NCAA tournament. Stephanie White had a successful first season as the coach of the Indiana Fever. After finishing 2025, 24, and 20, the Fever earned the number 6 seed in the playoffs and advanced to the semifinals for the first time in 10 years. However, with Clark, Cunningham, and others sidelined by injuries during the playoff run, Indiana's season ended in overtime of Game 5 against Las Vegas Aces. During the offseason, White joined Team USA as an assistant coach for the 2026 FIBA World Cup qualifiers.
Let's be specific about what Stephanie White accomplished in her first season back with Indiana. The Fever finished 20-20, earned the 6th seed, and made the semifinals for the first time in a decade. That's legitimately impressive. But here's what should concern every Fever fan. That success happened despite some questionable decisions, not because of them. Playing Caitlin Clark at the 4 position during the FIBA World Cup qualifiers in Puerto Rico, relegating Michaela Timpson to the bench after acquiring her, running the same stagnant half-court offense that got exposed in the playoffs when Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah Boston were dealing with injuries. The Vegas Aces ended Indiana's season in overtime of Game 5, and the gap between these teams isn't closing by itself.
Monday, she will call 2 first-round games, number 1 seed South Carolina versus number 16 seed Southern. Number 16 seed Southern. That's a team that you're wasting precious prep time for to focus on Southern. Number 9 seed USC versus number 8 seed Clemson. This is disgusting. This is disgusting. Stephanie White would much rather call games on ESPN than be focused on
Now here's where this gets problematic. We're not talking about a normal WNBA offseason where coaches have months to evaluate talent and build their rosters. The new collective bargaining agreement was finalized on March 14th after 8 days of marathon negotiations. That pushed everything back. The expansion draft for Toronto and Portland happens April 6th. Free agency opens April 7th with over 100 unrestricted free agents, including MVP Asia Wilson and Breanna Stewart. The college draft is later in April. Training camp starts April 19th. The season begins May 8th. Count those days. From March 23rd to April 19th, that's less than 4 weeks to navigate expansion protection lists, scout free agents, evaluate international talent, prepare for the college draft, and make critical roster decisions about Kelsey Mitchell's contract situation. 4 weeks to figure out how you're backfilling if Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull walk in free agency. 4 weeks to determine if you can afford to pay Mitchell when you've got 2 supermax contracts coming for Clark and Boston.
I would argue is detrimental to the success of the team. You see the Fever. You saw them last offseason. They got Michaela Timpson. Relegated her to the bench. They didn't go overseas. Instead, you see the Golden State Valkyrie go overseas and bring in tons of talent. Indiana Fever don't do that, and we are where we are. And in case you guys aren't aware of everything that is taking place, look at all this. It's March 23rd. Breaking down the packed WNBA offseason after CBA delay.
And what is Stephanie White doing during this critical window? She's in Columbia, South Carolina at Colonial Life Arena calling first and second round NCAA tournament games for ESPN. Specifically, she's preparing broadcast notes for number 1 seed South Carolina versus number 16 seed Southern. Let that sink in. Southern, the 16th seed that has zero chance of winning that game. She's also calling USC versus Clemson, a 9-8 matchup that means absolutely nothing for Indiana's future. Here's the question that should be keeping Fever fans awake at night. Do you scout college talent better by focusing intensely on 4 teams because you're calling their games, or do you scout better by studying film on dozens of prospects across multiple programs? The answer is obvious. White is limiting her draft preparation to whatever research she needs for broadcast prep. That's not comprehensive scouting. That's doing the bare minimum while prioritizing her ESPN career.
A bit less than a month away from training camp. Free agents still need to be signed. Draft still needs to be had. Now here we go. Do you think you would do better scouting college talent by only working on 4 teams just because you're going to call their game, so you need to prep for those 4 teams? Or do you think you prep for those 4 teams plus a plethora of other players on different schools? Nope, Stephanie White said, I'll just focus on these 4 teams. She's not committed to greatness.
Compare that approach to what championship coaches do during the offseason. Becky Hammon isn't calling college games right now. She's in the film room studying every available free agent, every international prospect, every potential trade scenario. Cheryl Reeve isn't doing broadcast work. She's on the phone with agents, watching overseas tape, preparing her pitch to retain Nafisa Collier. Sandy Brondello isn't completing side quests. She's figuring out how to build around Sabrina Ionescu and keep the Liberty competitive. These coaches understand something fundamental. You cannot be elite at multiple things simultaneously during a compressed timeline. You have to choose. And Stephanie White has chosen ESPN over the Indiana Fever.
What it is. You have the expansion draft. Toronto Temple and the Portland Fire. That takes place on April 6th. You have free agency. Free agency is set to begin the day after the expansion draft, according to the schedule the league presented to teams. From April 7th and 8th, teams can make qualifying offers to restricted or reserved or core eligible players. Negotiations officially begin April 9th, and players can formally sign deals on April 12th. You have the college draft. Then you have training camp, starting off April 19th.
Now, if this were a normal offseason with 3 or 4 months between the finals and training camp, maybe this wouldn't matter as much. White has been an ESPN analyst since 2007. She recently called her first NBA game between the Raptors and Magic in January. She has a legitimate broadcasting career, and there's value in maintaining that profile. But this isn't a normal offseason. The CBA delay compressed everything into a 46-day sprint, and White is spending precious days of that sprint doing television work instead of roster construction. Think about what she's missing while she's in that broadcast booth. The Golden State Valkyries went overseas and brought in international talent that immediately upgraded their expansion roster. Other teams are already negotiating with free agents, building relationships, making their pitches. Meanwhile, Indiana's head coach is worried about having the best talking points for South Carolina's inevitable blowout of a 16 seed.
Nick Saban, when he was in Alabama, just spending his offseason dilly-dallying, doing jack you-know-what. No, he spent his offseason diving into tape, diving into hours of footage, talking with his team, consulting with the staff. Stephanie White, are you just that hands-off in building this team? It's going to be Kelly and Amber Cogs? And you're hands-off? Please don't blame me. I'm just the head coach. My question is, what's Cheryl Reeve doing now? Is Cheryl Reeve trying to complete side quests? Shout out to Keep the Vision. Is she completing side quests? Is Becky Hammon completing side quests? Is Sandy Brondello completing side quests? Are there any championship coaches in the WNBA completing side quests during this short period of the WNBA offseason? Or are those 3 coaches actually too busy being obsessed with the process. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I appreciate all the support. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. That would mean so much to me.
Here's what makes this situation particularly frustrating for Fever fans. Stephanie White has legitimate decisions to make that will define this franchise for the next 5 years. Kelsey Mitchell is a free agent. She averaged over 17 points per game last season and was Indiana's second-best scorer behind Clark. Do you pay her what she's worth, knowing that Clark and Boston are going to command supermax contracts that will eat up significant cap space? If you don't pay Mitchell, how do you replace that scoring? Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull are both free agents. If they leave, where does your perimeter shooting come from? The expansion draft complicates everything. Indiana can protect 6 players. Clark, Boston, and Mitchell, if she's re-signed, are locks. But after that, you're making difficult choices. Do you protect Timpson even though White barely played her last season? Do you protect Erica Wheeler's veteran leadership? What about Damiris Dantas and her floor spacing? Every decision has cascading consequences, and those decisions require hundreds of hours of film study, salary cap analysis, and strategic planning. But instead of doing that work, Stephanie White is preparing broadcast notes about college players she could be evaluating in much greater depth if she wasn't worried about her on-air performance. She's studying 4 teams intensely for television purposes when she should be studying 40 teams for roster construction purposes. The priorities are backwards. Let's talk about what comprehensive offseason preparation actually looks like. When the Aces won back-to-back championships in 2022 and 2023, Becky Hammon spent her offseasons obsessing over every detail. She studied film on every potential free agent signing. She evaluated international players who could contribute immediately. She worked with her front office on creative salary cap solutions. She prepared multiple draft scenarios with her scouting department. She wasn't doing television appearances. She wasn't calling college games. She was locked in on one singular goal: building the best possible roster to win another championship. That's the standard. That's what obsession with the process looks like. And by that standard, Stephanie White is failing. She's treating this offseason like she has unlimited time to figure things out, when in reality she has less than 4 weeks before training camp starts and the roster needs to be finalized. Here's the other issue that nobody's talking about. White's decision to prioritize ESPN work sends a message to her players and her front office. It says, broadcasting is as important to me as coaching. It says, I'm not willing to sacrifice my media career for this team's success. And whether she intends it or not, that message creates doubt. If you're Caitlin Clark, do you have full confidence that your head coach is doing everything possible to build a championship roster around you? If you're Kelly Kroskoff, the Fever's president of basketball operations, are you comfortable with your head coach splitting focus during the most critical offseason in franchise history? The WNBA is entering a transformational era. The new CBA includes significant revenue sharing increases, higher salary caps, improved travel conditions, and expanded rosters. 2 expansion teams are joining the league. Television ratings exploded last season, largely because of Caitlin Clark's arrival, and the Fever were at the center of that attention. This is Indiana's moment. This is when you go all in on building a dynasty around a generational talent. And instead, Stephanie White is in Columbia, South Carolina, preparing to call a game between the #1 seed and a 16 seed that will be over by halftime. She's choosing to maintain her ESPN profile instead of maximizing her team's championship window. She's completing side quests when she should be focused on the main mission. Now let's address the obvious counter-argument. Maybe White has a strong front office that's handling most of the roster construction. Maybe Kelly Kroskoff and Amber Cox are doing the heavy lifting on free agent evaluations, salary cap planning, and draft preparation. Maybe White trusts her staff to handle things while she's away for a few days. That's possible, but here's the problem with that logic. The head coach is ultimately responsible for the roster. White needs to approve every signing, every draft pick, every trade. She can't make informed decisions if she hasn't personally studied the tape, watched the workouts, and evaluated the fit within her system. Delegating that responsibility to the front office means she's not fully invested in the process. And let's be honest about what White's track record suggests. Last offseason, Indiana acquired Makayla Timpson and then barely played her. They didn't pursue international talent aggressively, while other teams like Golden State brought in impact players from overseas. They entered the season with roster holes that became obvious during the playoffs when injuries exposed their lack of depth. Those aren't the decisions of a coaching staff that's obsessed with roster construction. Those are the decisions of a staff that's doing adequate preparation but not exceptional preparation. The great coaches are paranoid about preparation. They assume their competition is outworking them, so they push themselves to find every possible edge. Bill Belichick famously slept in his office during the offseason because he didn't want to waste time commuting. Greg Popovich spent decades building international relationships so he could identify overseas talent before anyone else. Pat Summitt required her assistant coaches to scout opponents in person multiple times per season because she didn't trust video alone. That's the mentality that builds dynasties. Stephanie White is showing the opposite mentality. She's comfortable splitting her attention between coaching and broadcasting. She's willing to let ESPN commitments take precedence over roster preparation during a compressed offseason. She's choosing short-term media exposure over long-term team building. And that's not how you maximize Caitlin Clark's prime years. Here's what should terrify Fever fans. Clark is 22 years old. She has maybe 10 elite years ahead of her, and probably only 5 or 6 years before her athleticism starts declining. That's your championship window. That's the time when every offseason decision matters exponentially. You cannot waste a single year of that window with inadequate preparation or suboptimal roster construction. The teams that win championships are the ones that treat every offseason like it's their last chance to get it right. And Stephanie White is treating this offseason like she has all the time in the world. She's in South Carolina calling games that don't matter for Indiana's future instead of being in Indianapolis grinding film and building relationships with free agents. She's prioritizing her broadcasting career over her coaching career. And unless something changes dramatically, that's going to cost the Fever in ways that won't be obvious until next season, when they're struggling to score without Kelsey Mitchell, or when they're getting destroyed on the boards because they didn't address their rebounding issues, or when they're losing playoff games because their depth isn't good enough. So here's the question Fever fans need to ask. Is Stephanie White obsessed with winning a championship, or is she obsessed with building her personal brand? Because right now, the evidence suggests it's the latter. And if that's true, Indiana needs to have a serious conversation about whether White is the right coach to lead this franchise during Caitlin Clark's prime years. Because mediocrity isn't good enough anymore. The Fever have a generational talent. They have massive fan support. They have financial resources. The only question is whether they have a coach who's willing to sacrifice everything else to win. What do you think? Is Stephanie White making a mistake by calling NCAA tournament games during the most important offseason in Fever history? Or is this much ado about nothing? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if you want to see more WNBA coverage, and subscribe because we're going deep on every major storyline this offseason. I'll see you in the next one.